Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
Indie Alaska is an innovative weekly web series capturing the diverse and colorful lifestyle of Alaskans. Real stories of everyday Alaskans at work and play. Supported in part by Alyeska Pipeline Service Company.
The National Weather Service.
Good evening and welcome to Alaska Weather. I'm Sam Albanese from the National Weather Service. Today's weather around the state, to start with, we do have some high wind watches out in the central and western Aleutian Islands for tomorrow afternoon through late tomorrow night. The potential is there for some strong winds upwards of about 75, not 75, gusting to about 75 miles an hour. And we'll take a look at what's going on. First, we'll start with our satellite imagery over the North Pacific, and we do have this big storm system here that's currently in the western Bering Sea pushing a front across, and then we have another system that's going to be coming into the picture here. This is the system that's going to make those produce those strong winds by tomorrow afternoon and evening over the western and central Aleutian Islands. We'll run that loop one more time and you can kind of see what's going on here. This front's working its way across the Bering Sea towards the Alaska Peninsula, and you can see this little bit of a signature here of where the next low pressure system, that's where your warm front is, and that's going to kind of produce yet another low that will eventually shoot down into the Gulf of Alaska. And speaking of the Gulf of Alaska, here's our satellite imagery over the Gulf, and we have this broad area of low pressure that's now in the Gulf of Alaska. The front is right up along the North Gulf Coast to southeast Alaska, and as we put that in motion, you can see the moisture has been pumping right on up into the Panhandle, resulting in rain throughout southeast Alaska pretty much all day today, right around to the eastern portions of the North Gulf Coast, even towards Cordova. There was some rain. Behind this system, in this wraparound flow in the colder air, generally showery type weather. Also note that this is pushing clouds on up into the eastern interior and across much of the interior regions of the state, although you can see in the satellite imagery where southwestern Alaska didn't have any of those clouds come around that far. Taking a look at the weather map today, here's that low pressure system in the Gulf with the front that was all along the North Gulf Coast to southeast Alaska. As I said earlier, when I was talking about the satellite imagery, rain throughout southeast Alaska to the eastern portions of Prince William Sound, even Kodiak Island was reporting some rain today. Cloudy conditions in the eastern interior, sunny conditions across much of the interior from the upper Yukon Valley down towards that Bristol Bay region, although the clouds did fill in late in the afternoon over that northeast interior. The Arctic coast generally had cloudy conditions, some snow showers over that eastern Brooks Range. And then in the Bering Sea, we can see our system and our front associated with that moving towards the Pribilof Islands and also towards the Unalaska Dutch Harbor area. This was producing rain or rain showers along this frontal boundary until you got pretty far north into that northwest portion of the Bering Sea where there was a mixture of rain and snow. Taking a look at the forecast for tonight. In the Gulf, we still have this low pressure. Basically, the main low is moving towards the Panhandle, but it's a broad area of open low pressure over the Gulf right on down into the North Pacific. Rainy conditions throughout southeast Alaska are going to persist up into the White and Chilkoot Pass region north of Haines and Skagway. Some snow should be mixed in with that. Same thing in the northern Prince William Sound region up towards Thompson Pass. Likely going to see some snow showers mixed in with the rain showers that should be falling down towards Valdez. Rain showers in western Prince William Sound down to the Kodiak Island area. The Cook Inlet region should stay free of the rain showers, although maybe some in the Chugach Mountains. Cloudy conditions across the interior right on up into the eastern interior, eastern Brooks Range. You do have a chance of some snow up in those regions as well as along the Arctic coast. There's a chance of some light snow overnight tonight. Clouds are going to clear out over the Seward Peninsula and Kotzebue Sound area as well as the Norton Sound area. Generally expect clouds to remain over the Yukon and Kuskokwim Delta region, but the Bristol Bay area should be clouding overnight tonight. Our front continues to move east across the Aleutians and the eastern Aleutians to the Alaska Peninsula, rain across the eastern Aleutians to the western Alaska Peninsula into the Pribilof Islands along this frontal boundary. And on the trailing front down through the Aleutian Islands, expect rain as this warm front comes up, as well as some rain potentially over towards the extreme western Aleutian Islands, although that's only a slight chance tonight. Now by tomorrow, this low really intensifies, and that's going to produce some really strong winds as the low moves north of the chain in that south quadrant of the low. Some very strong gusty westerly type winds can be expected there, along with the rain or showers behind that cold front. And taking a look at further back towards the eastern Aleutian Islands and the Alaska Peninsula, we should see rain again by the late afternoon, spreading into the eastern Aleutian Islands and the western Alaska Peninsula with this system, as well as into the Pribilof Islands. Cloudy conditions across Kodiak Island. We do have this low pressure in the Gulf of Alaska, kind of taking up residence there. Showery type conditions in the Prince William Sound area, rain continuing throughout southeast Alaska, higher up in elevation and then into the northern panhandle, potentially a mix of rain and snow is possible there. In the eastern interior, cloudy conditions, a chance of snow basically in eastern Tanana Valley right on up into the upper Yukon Valley, as well as we move towards the Arctic coast, a chance of some snow right along the coastal areas. Taking a look now at the forecast for Friday, we have our low pressure system still rather intense, moving over towards that Bristol Bay region. The front extends across Kodiak Island to a low that will be forming along the frontal boundary east of Kodiak Island. This is going to be pushing moisture on up into the northern panhandle, at least the northern half of the panhandle from Sitka north, so expect rain in those areas, and this is also going to bring ample warm air with it, so it's just going to be rain. Southern panhandle, there's a chance you may see some rain, but not very likely. Along the North Gulf Coast and into Prince William Sound, early in the day Friday, probably not going to see any rain, but as this system continues to push to the north, by Friday night, you're likely going to see rain into the Sound. Rain across Kodiak Island, rain across the Bristol Bay region, at least right along the coastal areas, not so much inland until late Friday night time frame. The Alaska Peninsula should be in the rain, as well as the eastern Aleutian Islands, and some rain and snow mixed around the northeast side of this low pressure system into the central Bering Sea. Trailing this low is a trough of low pressure along the length of the Aleutian Islands, and expect rain showers along that trough, and as well as some gusty winds. Taking a look now at our temperatures around the state today. Southeast Alaska generally in the 40s, mid to upper 40s, low 50s in the southern panhandle. North Gulf Coast, Prince William Sound in the 40s, 20s and 30s as we move further north into the northern Cook Inlet region, into the Susitna Valley. Single digits in the Copper River Basin, single digits across much of the eastern interior, though Fairbanks did reach the 20-degree mark, generally in the teens over the central interior. Moving on up towards the Arctic coast, north of the Brooks Range, temperatures in the teens to low 20s across much of that region, teens along the Brooks Range, 20s over that Seward Peninsula region, 20s to low 30s as we move on down towards the Yukon and Kuskokwim Delta. And then into southwestern Alaska, Bristol Bay area, temperatures today into the mid-20s to low 30s there. And then as we move on out towards the Alaska Peninsula itself, temperatures into the low 40s right on over towards the eastern Aleutian Islands, upper 30s in the Pribilof Islands, out across the Aleutian Islands themselves in the Atka and Adak area, low 50s today with mid-40s out towards Shemya. Taking a look now at our low temperature forecast for tonight. Southeast Alaska, expect temperatures in the mid-30s to mid-40s. Along the North Gulf Coast, expect temperatures generally in the low 20s to low 30s, although Cordova should stay up around 35 degrees. Cool conditions as you move on up into the eastern interior, single digits above and below zero there. Arctic coast, expect your temperatures to drop down to between 5 and 15 degrees, generally speaking, as well as down towards the Seward Peninsula. Expect your temperatures generally in the single digits to teens, although some locations will remain in the low 20s. Southwestern Alaska and the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta in the teens. Off the coast in the mid-20s, Bristol Bay, teens inland to near 30 as we get down towards the Alaska Peninsula. In the low to mid-30s along the Alaska Peninsula to low 40s over the eastern Aleutian Islands to mid-40s over the central Aleutian Islands, and mid-30s in the Pribilof Islands. Taking a look at the highs for tomorrow. Temperatures in southeast Alaska generally much like they were today, low 40s to near 50. Same thing for the south central region. Temperatures generally in the 30s, as you move further north into the Sitna Valley, mid-30s, a little bit warmer than today. Copper River Basin should see some significant warming from today into the mid-20s. Teens into the eastern interior, teens along the Arctic coast until you get to the northwest Arctic coast. Temperatures in the 20s there. 20s along the Seward Peninsula, 20s and 30s as we move on down towards the Bering Sea coastal areas, towards Bristol Bay, in the upper 20s. 40s along the Alaska Peninsula, upper 30s to low 40s. 50 near Dutch Harbor, 40s to near 50 along the remainder of the Aleutian Islands, and near 40 in the Pribilof Islands. Taking a look at flying weather for tomorrow. Marginal conditions throughout southeast Alaska to the North Gulf Coast, as well as western Prince William Sound. Marginal conditions up along the Arctic coast, basically from the Brooks Range north, with some IFR conditions over the western Arctic coast and out over the Aleutians in the Bering Sea region. Marginal to IFR conditions over the Alaska Peninsula, to IFR conditions over the eastern to central Aleutian Islands, to marginal conditions out towards the western Aleutian Islands is what you can expect for tomorrow. For our passes tomorrow, expect marginal conditions for Anaktuvuk Pass, particularly on the north side of the pass. Same thing for Adigan Pass, marginal conditions on the north side of the pass. Along the Alaska Range for Lake Clark and Merrill Pass, expect some VFR conditions for both of those areas. Rainy Pass, expect VFR conditions. Windy Pass, also expecting VFR conditions. Isabel Pass, VFR conditions, as well as Mentasta Pass. Down towards the Chugach Mountains, VFR conditions for Tonita Pass. However, in Portage Pass, probably going to see some marginal conditions at times during the day tomorrow because of those clouds that are coming in and the possibility of some showers overnight and tomorrow in western Prince William Sound. And then down in southeast Alaska with the rainy, cloudy conditions, marginal conditions are what you can expect for Chilkoot and White Pass. For our freezing levels for tomorrow, the majority of the state, basically once you get north of the Gulf of Alaska inland at the surface. Southeast Alaska freezing levels sloping up to about 4,000 feet as you get down towards that Dixon entrance region. Freezing levels sloping to about 4,000 feet over the western Alaska Peninsula, and then your freezing level will be up to about 6,000 to 8,000 feet over the central to eastern Aleutian Islands as that influx of warm air comes in with that low pressure system. For icing tomorrow, over southeast Alaska, isolated moderate rime icing can be expected from your freezing level to about 14,000 feet, particularly with the precipitation that's going on there. Also, that's possible in that western Prince William Sound area. Icing out into the Bering Sea with our storm system out there. Expect occasional to widespread mixed icing, basically from the western Alaska Peninsula to the eastern Aleutian Islands and central Aleutian Islands, as well as on up to the Pribilof Islands, and then isolated moderate rime icing as we move further out west, basically west of the Adak area towards Shemya, from your freezing level to 14,000 feet out in that area. For our jet stream tomorrow, expect the jet stream to be coming off of the Kamchatka Peninsula or the southern tip of it at about 115 knots, south of the Aleutian Islands still at 115 knots, dropping off to 85 knots as we move on over towards the Bristol Bay area, crossing Kodiak Island down into the Gulf of Alaska at about 130 knots, and then coming back up towards Vancouver Island and inland on the mainland at about 130 knots. Moving on down to the 9,000 foot level, expect generally light winds over much of the interior, particularly the central to western interior. 20 to 30 knot winds in this North Gulf Coast region and the northern portion of the Panhandle to 35 knots, 25 knots down in the southern Panhandle. About 25 to 35 knot winds coming across the Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island. And then we have our storm center out into the central to western Aleutians. 70 to 80 knot winds south and east of that low, 30 to 45 knot winds behind that low pressure system. As we move on down to the 3,000 foot level, again with our low pressure system out there in the central to western Aleutian Islands and Bering Sea, about 60 to 75 knot winds east and south of that low. 40 knot winds over the northern portion of the low, and about 40 knot winds also behind the low with 20 knots as you move out further into the western Bering Sea. 25 knot winds as we come across the central to eastern Aleutian Islands to the Alaska Peninsula, and then as we start to see the flow around our low in the Gulf of Alaska, about 20 knot winds across Kodiak Island, 25 knot winds south of that low, tapering off to 15 knots in the northern Panhandle, 10 knots or less in the southern Panhandle, and then over the mainland expect your winds to be about 10 to 15 knots out of the east, and also over the Arctic coastal areas, about 15 knot winds coming out of the northeast across towards that Seward Peninsula. Taking a look at our turbulence for tomorrow, Expect some isolated moderate turbulence below about 2,000 feet in the southern half of southeast Alaska, and also expect some moderate turbulence, occasional moderate turbulence below 3,000 feet over the Aleutian Islands from basically Falls Pass west. And then we'll take a look now at our ice edge. The ice edge, basically the ice is closed in pretty much all along the north and east coast of the Arctic coast to Barrow, and shore fast ice all the way down towards Point Lay. Some ice forming in the Kotzebue Sound as well as the Norton Sound area. But that wraps up this portion of the show. Enjoy the segment and come back to the marine forecast.
Thanks for joining us for another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider, and joining us today is Eric Stevens from GINA, the Geographic Information Network of Alaska at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. Thank you for joining us, Eric.
My pleasure, Dave.
Thank you. And you're joining us here to talk a little bit more about satellites and how satellites work, and especially one neat feature that's working over Alaska right now. What is that?
Well, there's a lot of weather satellites and a lot of instruments on these satellites, and there are new generations going up and new instruments. This includes something called the Day-Night Band, which is not a cover band at the local bar, but it's a new satellite that is very useful, especially here in Alaska, especially in the winter.
In the wintertime, yeah, that makes it a little bit hard to use some of the normal tools that we associate with weather satellite imagery.
Right. You know, one of the classic weather satellite instruments is just visible light. What would the human eye see if you were riding on a weather satellite yourself and looked down, and it was black and white? You'd see the clouds reflecting the sunlight. And we've got an example from the Pacific Ocean. There's a geostationary satellite, and we can see that the eastern side of the image is in daylight. The western side, it's night over there, so you don't see anything because there's no sunlight over there. And visible imagery, it's very intuitive. You see the clouds just like you see them standing on the ground, but now you're a satellite seeing them from above. But the problem is, what about the night side of the planet? How do you track the storms? How do you know where the rain is, the snow, the weather, if you can't see the clouds? And that's why, just like a television can change from one channel to another, or a radio can change stations, satellites can change the frequency of the electromagnetic spectrum that they're looking at. We can go to infrared instead of visible light. You know, it's heat energy. You can see heat, and we've got another satellite picture from the same time, same satellite, out over the Pacific Ocean. That's the infrared side, and we're seeing temperature there. And even at night, when there's no light, everything still has a temperature.
So we're sensing something with a thermometer instead of perhaps the visible side of that, is what you're saying?
That's right. On this depiction, colder features are lighter shades, warmer features are dark. And so clouds tend to be colder than the ground. Clouds are higher in the atmosphere, it's cooler. And so that very same image on the western, or the left-hand side of the globe, now we can see the clouds there, even though it's nighttime, because we're seeing the temperatures. And one nice feature is that tropical storm there, just in the middle of the northern hemisphere there, hurricane or typhoon, depending on...
That's that swirly part that we see in the middle of the image?
There you go. You can even see the eye on it there, especially in the infrared image. So we've got two kinds of imagery there from the same satellite, different instruments, you know, different channels like on a television, visible and infrared. You know, it turns out there's no one magic tool. Each has its strengths, each has its flaws, weaknesses. The visible is nice, it's intuitive, it's easy to understand, but doesn't work at night. Infrared is nice, it works at night, you can see temperatures, but there is a catch. What if your clouds and the nearby bare ground or open water, what if those were about the same temperature?
Oh, that's going to be hard to figure out what's going on.
If you can only see temperature and you have two features that are the same temperature, they will look the same. You won't be able to tell. They're camouflaged. This happens, especially, it can happen around Alaska, especially over the ocean when you have low clouds that are the same temperature as the open water.
That happens quite a bit in Alaska.
We have an example. Now, this is from a different geostationary satellite. It's down over the Atlantic Ocean. Look in the South Atlantic. In infrared, we've highlighted in a yellow circle there. There's some patches of clouds, but it looks like there's a clear area in the middle of that image. That's the infrared look. But let's take a look at the visible channel, and we can see there's a stripe of clouds across the middle of that circle that is only visible in the visible. The trick here is that those are low clouds of about the same temperature as the surrounding ocean. So from an infrared point of view, where you're seeing temperature, the clouds in the water nearby are the same temperature, they look the same. It's only on the visible that you can see what stands out as the actual imagery. Two tools, each have their strengths and weaknesses. Can we combine them? That's where the day-night band comes in.
Oh, okay.
It's a super sensitive visible sensor that can actually see by moonlight. It can even see the aurora.
Wow.
And in Alaska, we have long winter nights. We can use that day-night band. Here's an example from that storm that blew the Kullik drilling platform ashore near Kodiak Island in December back in 2012. This image is right near when that storm happened, and it's in the middle of the night in December.
This looks like visible imagery.
Looks like daytime imagery. It's amazing. That sensor can take any little bit of moonlight and just make the most of it. And we can see so much detail. Even in the northern part of the image there, you can see some aurora up there. The northern lights
That's that band that goes across the Arctic slope?
You got it. That's the northern lights. We're seeing black and white image here, so you don't get the green or the purple colors there. But that is the aurora. There's another example of the day-night band, and this is from January of 2013. It's about 4 in the morning, and this is a snapshot from Weather Service software. And we can even see in the middle of the image, there's the lights of Fairbanks and North Pole over to Eielson Air Force Base. Anchorage and Matsu lights, city lights, are evident as well. We can see, even though it's 4 in the morning in January, there is no sunlight to be had, that just enough moonlight is available that this sensor can see that. So we're trying to solve that puzzle where visible light is good, but only during the daytime. IR is good at night, but you can't see the difference between clouds and ground sometime. The day-night band is an attempt to do the best of both with one tool. And it's brand new for Alaska here, and we're hoping to use it in the forecast process and help predict storms, weather patterns, to help get good forecasts for people.
Okay, another tool in the weather toolkit for meteorologists in Alaska and researchers worldwide. Thank you so much, Eric, for joining us today. And you can learn more about GINA and the day-night band by going to the web address that you see on your screen. For Alaska Weather Facts, I'm meteorologist Dave Snider.
Welcome back, and now let's take a look at our marine forecast for southeast Alaska on Thursday. Expect your winds to be out of the west around 25 knots in the southern outside waters, southeast to south around 30 knots in the southern inside waters. The central inside waters, expect your winds to be out of the east to north, basically running down. It's pretty much terrain-driven type winds. Same thing in the northern panhandle up in the Lynn Canal Glacier Bay area. North winds about 30 knots there. Further north, expect southeast winds 30 knots off the coast of Gustavus and Sitka, with variable winds to 10 knots off of the Yakutat area, that east Gulf Coast. Taking a look at the forecast for Friday, southeast winds 25 knots in the southern inside waters to the central inside waters, and south winds 20 knots up through Lynn Canal and Glacier Bay. South winds 30 knots in the southern outside waters to 25 knots as you move a little bit further north. And then southeast winds 30 knots along that east Gulf Coast or just off of Yakutat Bay. Taking a look now at the forecast for Thursday over the south central region. Expect your winds to be generally pretty light, about north to northeast 10 to 15 knots out of Prince William Sound, the North Gulf Coast, and south of Seward. Cook Inlet, same thing, about north winds 10 to 15 knots, not too terribly strong. Stronger winds coming down through the Barren Islands, northwest 30 knots, and then across Shelikof Strait, northwest 20 knots with 25 knots south of Kodiak Island. By Friday, we're going to see things increase a little bit as that next system is coming into the Gulf. Expect your winds to be gale force along the North Gulf Coast, 35 knots out of the southeast. Small craft in Prince William Sound at 25 knots. Small craft south of the Kenai Peninsula down to the Barren Islands. Gale force winds south of Kodiak Island out of the southeast. Northeast winds down Shelikof Strait at 25 knots. East winds 30 knots in the west of the Barren Islands, and north winds about 20 to 25 knots down Cook Inlet. Taking a look now at the forecast for Thursday over the Alaska Peninsula. Expect your winds to be out of the south and southeast about 30 to 40 knots over the western Alaska Peninsula. East winds out of Bristol Bay late in the day, they'll become east around 30 knots. And then south of the eastern Alaska Peninsula, most of the day, northwest winds 20 knots. Late in the day, those winds are actually going to become more east-southeast around 10 to 15 knots, more towards Thursday evening. By Friday, we're going to see that front go by, the southwesterly flow kicks in, storm force winds out of the southwest, south of the eastern Alaska Peninsula, 40-knot winds, south of the western Alaska Peninsula, 40-knot winds south of the eastern Alaska Peninsula, west winds 35 knots on the north side of the Alaska Peninsula, and north winds around 30 knots in the Bristol Bay region. Out across the Aleutian Islands for Thursday, storm force winds over the eastern Aleutian Islands out of the southwest 50 to 55 knots, 45 to 50 knots as we move on to west of Nikolsky, 50 to 65 knots as we get towards that Atka to Adak region, and then 45 knot winds over the Amchitka area with winds out of the west 35 knots as you get out towards Shemya. By Friday, those winds are going to still be gale force out of the west over by Shemya, over towards Amchitka. West winds 40 to 50 knots in the Atka to Adak area, 45 to 55 knots west of Nikolsky with 50 to 55 knot winds likely over the eastern Aleutian Islands. Taking a look at the Bering Sea coastal waters for Thursday, expect gale force winds throughout the entire region, 35 knots, generally speaking out of the east to northeast. Taking a look at the area for Friday, northeast winds to north winds can be expected, and again, all gale force winds throughout the entire region. For our Arctic coastal waters on Thursday, expect your winds to be out of the northeast around 15 to 20 knots outside of Kotzebue Sound over towards Cape Lisburne, 10 to 15 knots as we move on over towards Barrow with 15 knot winds from Prudhoe Bay to the east. By Friday, we'll see the winds more out of the northeast and increasing about 20 to 25 knots over the eastern Arctic coastal waters, northeast 20 knots near Barrow, gale force winds off of the Point Lay area at 35 knots out of the northeast, and 30 knot winds from Cape Lisburne down to outside of Kotzebue Sound and also out of the northeast. Taking a look at the forecast again for tonight. Low pressure in the Gulf of Alaska, rainy conditions in southeast Alaska with some showery conditions over towards Prince William Sound and Kodiak Island. Out into the Bering Sea, we do have our storm system out there. This is the one that's currently in place. This is the one that's going to be developing and intensifying rapidly, and that's going to be the reason that we have the high wind watches out for the central to western Aleutian Islands. Strong west-southwest winds, basically upwards of about 75 miles around the south side of this low. Along with the wind, you can expect some rain. Rain can also be expected to spread out in advance of this system to the western Alaska Peninsula and the Pribilof Islands. But we're out of time for the show this evening. Thank you for watching and have a good evening.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.